So this video is about how I almost cut my thumb off. Not really, but I cut pretty deeply into my thumb with a bandsaw by accident. Now, if you watch a lot of YouTubes about bandsaw safety, as I did before using a bandsaw, you are led to believe that bandsaws are safe. And relatively speaking, they are compared to generally any sort of power tool with a circular disc or motion, a circular blade coming into contact with wood. There's the risk of kickback or your hand being drawn in. That's not so much the case with a bandsaw. And compared to a table saw, you can safely get your fingers closer to the blade. But just as a precaution, I made it a point to keep my fingers away from the blade. However, even though I did that, there's something that when you look up videos about bandsaw safety on YouTube that people don't talk about that isn't immediately obvious. And that is the danger of using a dull blade. A dull bandsaw blade is extremely dangerous, and I'll explain to you why. And this bandsaw that I cut my thumb on, this is a 2 horsepower 17-inch bandsaw, and I was using, you can see the blade here, this is the blade that cut into my thumb. This is three teeth per inch, so this is like a milling blade. That's for like milling wood and cutting veneers. It's a big one, so the worst possible blade. And this piece of wood has blood on it. How convenient. That's actually from my accident with the angle grinder. So I was originally using this, with that blade, I was using this bandsaw to cut bowl blanks. And everything was going fine, but I was cutting a bunch of bowl blanks. And what I didn't realize at the time was that my bandsaw blade, the blade I just showed you over there, was getting dull in the process. So then I decided, after I cut all the bowl blanks that I wanted to, I decided that I would try to like mill some sort of like 2x4 shaped pieces of wood with a live edge slab that I had that was bent out of shape. So I started doing that, and everything was going fine. And if you could just imagine that blade on this bandsaw, I was kind of using this as like a wall here, a fence, a bandsaw fence, and I was pushing the blade through, and I thought I would be fine pushing this wood into the blade because I saw a bunch of other people on YouTube talking about bandsaw safety doing that, and their hands were getting really close. And if you could just imagine, like, the bandsaw blade rather, was sawing the wood, and you know their fingers were close. I was watching these videos, and they were talking about bandsaw safety and the benefits of bandsaws over circular saws, table saws, and how it's safer to get your fingers close. And for a while, it seemed pretty reasonable. It seemed okay. But again, what they don't tell you, and I'm just saying this to remind you, is that a dull bandsaw blade is extremely dangerous, and that changes everything. So generally, you don't want to get your fingers close to a bandsaw blade. What someone told me on a YouTube video, and I was following this advice the whole time, when I cut myself, was to keep your fingers 5 inches away from the bandsaw blade. And that's what I did. But because my bandsaw blade was dull, and I was resawing this wood, pushing it into the bandsaw blade, as you can see here, like if you could just imagine the blade on the bandsaw right now, it's not, but if you could just imagine a blade there, my thumb was in the path of the bandsaw blade. And what happens is when your blade dulls, it's like a dull kitchen knife. Your subconscious tendency is to push the wood into the blade to apply more pressure. And as I was resawing the wood, if I could just sort of like reenact this here, I was resawing the wood, and there was some resistance because the blade was dull, but I didn't realize it. And I pushed it, and I applied a little bit more force, and then it gave, and I pushed my thumb into the bandsaw blade. I feel funny doing it just now. I mean, there isn't even a blade on here, but ugh. And I cut into my thumb. It's healed now, but this was three and a half or 4 weeks ago. It cut pretty pretty deep into my thumb. Not enough to like cut it off, but enough that I had to go into the emergency room and keep it bandaged for 2 weeks. And even now, there's tingly feelings and pain in my thumb. But you know, I'm just making this video because I want people to be aware of this. Because I watched a bunch of YouTube videos on bandsaw safety, and nobody said anything about the dangers of a dull bandsaw blade. And the lesson to be learned here is that, number one, never use a dull bandsaw blade. It's just dangerous. Just don't do it, because your subconscious tendency is going to be to apply more pressure, to push into the blade, which can cause you to accidentally slip and push your fingers into the blade or your arm or whatever. And the second thing is, make sure you keep your hand and your body parts away, out of the path of the blade. So if you're using a bandsaw, if you can, use push sticks. I actually have some push sticks here. I should have brought them out. So the next time I'm using my bandsaw, normally people use these with table saws, but I'm going to use this with my bandsaw. And so if something happens, not like that, but you know, if I'm sawing a piece of wood, and I'm not going to use a dull blade, but let's just imagine if the blade were just a little bit dull and I feel like I have to push a little bit more, and then the blade cuts through and it slips. That's a bad example, but if I'm pushing, and let's say I'm right here and I'm pushing it, and then there's some, it gives, the blade cuts through, whatever, at least the push stick goes into the bandsaw and not my finger. And again, I want to keep my body parts outside of the path of the blade, so I don't cut off my fingers, my hands, whatever. Because this is a very powerful bandsaw, but really any bandsaw, you really don't want your fingers anywhere near the blade, and you don't want it in the path of the blade, because there's always a possibility, again, as your bandsaw gets dull, you could push your body parts into the path into the blade. So don't do that, and use a push stick, and never use a dull bandsaw blade. People do hurt themselves on bandsaws. They are dangerous, so be careful.